Billionaire tested his maid's loyalty. Her response changed everything. The test begins. The marble floors of Hartwell Estate gleamed like frozen lakes under the crystal chandeliers, reflecting a cold perfection that matched its owner's reputation. Adrian Hartwell stood at his study window watching the iron gates swing open to admit yet another potential employee. The fifth maid in 3 months. He'd dismissed each previous one for various infractions: theft, nosiness, or simply failing his unspoken tests of character. At 36, Adrian had built his technology empire through careful calculation and ruthless business decisions. Trust was a luxury he'd learned to live without after his former partner had embezzled millions and his ex-fiancée had sold company secrets to competitors. Now, everyone who entered his world underwent scrutiny, even the help. Sophie Monroe stepped out of the taxi, clutching a worn duffel bag against her chest. Her interview suit was pressed, but clearly secondhand, the hem slightly frayed. She gazed up at the massive estate, her brown eyes widening, not with greed, as Adrian had seen in others, but with something closer to anxious determination. Through the window, he watched her square her shoulders, whisper something to herself, and walk forward with purpose. Mrs. Chen, the housekeeper, conducted the tour while Adrian observed from various vantage points throughout the mansion. Sophie listened attentively, asking practical questions about cleaning supplies and schedules rather than inquiring about Adrian's wealth or personal life. She didn't photograph the artwork or linger near valuable items. Instead, she traced her fingers along a dusty windowsill and commented that the east wing needed more natural light to feel welcoming. "When can I start?" Sophie asked Mrs. Chen earnestly. "My mother's next treatment is scheduled for 2 weeks from now, and I need to cover the costs." Adrian's interest sharpened. A sick mother. That detail hadn't been in her sparse application. Most people led with their hardships, using them as leverage. Sophie had mentioned it only when discussing her start date. "Tomorrow morning, 6 o'clock, Mrs. Chen replied, her normally stern face softening slightly. Something about this young woman's genuine manner seemed to affect even his most jaded staff member. The testing began immediately. Adrian had developed a system over the years, a series of calculated scenarios designed to reveal true character. On Sophie's first day, he deliberately left a $50 bill on the hallway console table, positioned as if it had fallen from his pocket. Most people would pocket it. Some would turn it in, but only after calculating whether cameras might have caught them. Sophie found it while dusting. Adrian watched through a doorway as she picked it up, examined it briefly, then immediately carried it to Mrs. Chen's office. "I found this in the east hallway," she explained simply. "Should I put it in Mr. Hartwell's study or give it to you to return?" "Leave it on his desk," Mrs. Chen instructed, exchanging a meaningful glance with Adrian, who'd positioned himself nearby. Test 1. Passed. The following week, Adrian arranged for a valuable antique watch to be accidentally knocked behind a dresser during Sophie's shift. He wanted to see if she'd report it or pocket it, thinking no one would notice its absence immediately. Sophie discovered it while moving furniture to clean properly, something the previous maids had never bothered doing. She emerged from the room holding it carefully in a cloth. "Mr. Hartwell?" Her voice was hesitant but clear. "I found this behind the dresser in the blue guest room. It looks expensive. I wanted to return it directly to you." Adrian accepted the watch, studying her face for any sign of expectation. A tip, recognition, favor. He found only relief that she'd located it and concern that it might have been damaged. "Thank you," he said curtly, testing whether dismissive gratitude would offend her. Sophie simply smiled. "I'm glad it's safe. That room is beautiful, by the way. The morning light makes the wallpaper look like clouds." She returned to her duties without waiting for further acknowledgement. Test 2. Passed. But Adrian remained unconvinced. Honesty with valuables was basic decency. He needed to test her character more deeply. The real measure of a person emerged. Under pressure, when no one was watching, when kindness offered no benefit. The storm arrived on a Thursday evening. Adrian had given all staff the afternoon off due to weather warnings, but he remained in his study working. At 8 o'clock, thunder shook the windows. The power flickered, then died completely. Adrian sat in darkness, about to call his driver, when he heard something unexpected. Footsteps in the main hall. His security system's backup generator kicked in, illuminating the corridors dimly. Through his study door, he saw Sophie, soaked from rain, struggling with flashlights and candles. "Miss Monroe?" He emerged from his study. "Why are you here? Everyone was dismissed hours ago." Sophie jumped, nearly dropping her armload of supplies. "Mr. Hartwell, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to startle you. I was already on my way home when the storm hit. The buses stopped running and I knew you were still here. I saw your study light before the power failed. I thought you might need help." Or, she trailed off, looking embarrassed. "I'm sorry, I overstepped. I'll leave." In this weather? Adrian gestured to the windows, where rain lashed violently against the glass. "That would be foolish. I can call a taxi. With what phones? The cell towers are likely affected." He watched her carefully. She was shivering, her cheap jacket inadequate against the cold. "Why did you really come back?" Sophie bit her lip, then answered honestly. "Because I thought you might be alone, and storms can be scary when you're by yourself in a big house. My dad died during a storm when I was 12. Power outage, carbon monoxide from a faulty generator. Ever since, I can't stand the thought of anyone being alone in the dark during bad weather." The confession hung between them, raw and unadorned. Adrian felt something crack in his chest, not pity, but recognition. He'd been alone in darkness for years, metaphorically speaking. This woman, who barely knew him, had walked back into a storm because she couldn't bear the thought of anyone experiencing that isolation. "The kitchen has a gas stove," he heard himself say. "Can you make tea?" Sophie's face brightened. "Yes, absolutely." They sat in the kitchen while the storm raged outside, drinking tea by candlelight. Sophie didn't pry into his personal life or attempt to leverage this unusual situation. Instead, she talked about her mother, a retired teacher with stage 3, cancer, fighting hard but financially devastated by treatments. She spoke about her younger brother finishing college, about the tiny apartment they shared, about her mother's garden that bloomed stubbornly in pots on their fire escape. "She taught me that kindness doesn't cost anything," Sophie said softly, warming her hands on her cup. "Even when we had nothing, we could still be kind. It's the one inheritance I have that nobody can take away." Adrian found himself sharing things he'd never voiced aloud, not the business betrayals, but smaller truths. How he'd grown up in foster care after his parents died, how he'd built his company from a college dorm room, how success had brought him everything except the one thing that mattered, someone to share it with who wanted him rather than his wealth. "That must be incredibly lonely," Sophie said simply, with such genuine sympathy that Adrian felt exposed in a way no business rival had ever managed. When the storm passed near midnight, Adrian arranged for his driver to take Sophie home. As she left, she turned back at the door. "Thank you for the tea and conversation, Mr. Hartwell. I hope you won't be alone during the next storm." After she left, Adrian sat in his study, staring at nothing. Every test he'd devised, she'd passed, without even knowing she was being tested. But more than that, she'd revealed something he'd tried to bury, his own desperate loneliness, the walls he'd built so high that no genuine connection could reach him. He picked up his phone and called his lawyer. "I need you to research something." Quietly. "Cancer treatments, experimental options, the best doctors." He paused. "And find out about a woman named Sophie Monroe. Not her work history. I already know she's an excellent employee. I want to know about her mother's condition and what they need." "Planning another test?" his lawyer asked knowingly. Adrian surprised himself with his answer. "No, planning to help." For the first time in years, the cold, empty mansion felt different as he climbed the stairs to his bedroom. And in the guest room where Sophie had noticed the morning light, he paused to look at the wallpaper she'd compared to clouds. She was right. It was beautiful. He'd simply never bothered to notice. The test had begun as his evaluation of her. Somehow, without intending to, Sophie Monroe had tested him instead. tested whether his heart was completely frozen or whether, beneath layers of cynicism and distrust, something warm remained. He was beginning to suspect he'd failed his own test. And for once, failure didn't feel like defeat. It felt like possibility. Hearts transformed. 3 weeks after the storm, Adrian set his final test into motion. It was elaborate, potentially cruel, but he needed absolute certainty. Trust wasn't something he could rebuild halfway. Either Sophie Monroe was genuinely the person she appeared to be, or she was the most sophisticated con artist he'd ever encountered. Only an extreme scenario would reveal the truth. He called his lawyer and public relations team into his study on a Monday morning. "I need you to plant a story," he instructed. "Leak to the financial press that Hartwell Technologies is facing bankruptcy. Make it believable. Failed investments, embezzlement investigation, the works. I want it everywhere by Wednesday." His PR director looked horrified. "Mr. Hartwell, that could tank your actual stock price." "The board will—" "I'll handle the board," Adrian interrupted. "This is temporary. We'll issue a correction by Friday. But for 72 hours, the world needs to believe I've lost everything." By Wednesday morning, headlines blazed across every business publication. Tech Titan's empire crumbles. Hartwell faces financial ruin. Adrian had his accountant inform all household staff that their positions were being evaluated due to financial constraints. He gave them a week's severance pay and told them to find other employment. He watched Sophie's reaction carefully during the announcement. Her face went pale, but not for herself. She immediately asked, "Mr. Hartwell, does this mean you'll lose the house?" "Very likely," Adrian replied, playing his role. "I've made some catastrophic investment errors. I may lose everything." Sophie's eyes filled with tears, not for her lost job, but visible sympathy for his situation. "I'm so sorry," she said softly. "That must be devastating after everything you've built." That afternoon, Adrian received a text message from Sophie. "Mr. Hartwell, I know this is probably inappropriate, but I have some money saved, about $3,000. It's not much, but if it could help even a little, I want you to have it. My mother and I can manage a bit longer. Please let me help." Adrian stared at his phone in disbelief. $3,000 represented months of savings for someone earning Sophie's salary. Money she desperately needed for her mother's treatments. And she was offering it to him, her employer, someone she barely knew, because she thought he needed it. He called her immediately. "Miss Monroe, I can't accept your money. Please." Her voice cracked slightly. "I know what it's like to lose everything. You've been kind to me, and I can't just do nothing. Meet me at the estate," Adrian said quietly. "We need to talk." When Sophie arrived an hour later, she looked anxious but determined, clutching an envelope that presumably contained her offering. Adrian had spent that hour preparing his confession, trying to find words adequate for what he'd done. He met her in the conservatory, surrounded by the plants she'd tended during her brief employment, bringing life to spaces that had been merely ornamental before. "Sophie, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen without interrupting." She nodded, gripping the envelope tighter. "The bankruptcy story is false," Adrian began. "I planted it. The financial crisis, the lost investments, all manufactured fiction. My company is fine, better than fine." He watched her expression shift from confusion to dawning comprehension. "I've been testing you since the day you were hired. The money left on tables, the missing watch, all of it. Deliberate tests of your character." Sophie's face drained of color. "Tests," she repeated flatly. "I've been betrayed before," Adrian continued, words tumbling out. "People close to me, people I trusted, destroyed that trust for profit. I built walls, created systems to protect myself, and when you came along, seeming too good to be true, I assumed you were another con artist with a better strategy. So—" "You lied to me," Sophie said, her voice shaking. "You made me think you were losing everything, knowing I'd—" She looked down at the envelope in her hands. "Knowing I'd offer what little I had." "Yes." Adrian had never felt shame quite like this. "I'm not proud of it. I was testing whether your kindness was genuine or calculated, whether you'd stay loyal even when there was nothing to gain." Sophie was silent for a long moment. Then she set the envelope carefully on a nearby table and looked directly at him. Mr. Hartwell, I don't need tests to know my own heart. I offered that money because watching someone suffer, even someone who can typically afford not to, goes against everything I believe. My mother is dying, yes. We need every penny, yes. But what's the point of having money if you lose your humanity? To keep it? Her eyes glistened with tears, but her voice remained steady. I thought maybe, during that storm, you'd started to see me as a person instead of an employee. I thought we'd connected as human beings. But I was wrong. To you, I was always just part of an experiment. No, Adrian said urgently, stepping closer. That's not, Sophie. It started as a test, yes. But somewhere along the way, everything changed. When you came back during the storm, when you talked about your mother's garden, when you noticed the light in rooms I'd stopped seeing, I started realizing that the person being tested was me. Sophie shook her head, backing toward the door. I think I should go. Please, Adrian said, and the desperation in his voice stopped her. Please let me explain. Let me tell you why I'm so broken that I test everyone who gets close. She paused, hand on the doorframe. Adrian took a shaky breath. I was 8 when my parents died in a car accident. Foster care system, different homes. Some good, most indifferent. I learned early that trust is a liability. Built my first company at 22. Took on a business partner I considered my best friend. He embezzled $700,000 and disappeared. I rebuilt, met. A woman, fell in love, proposed. She was secretly dating a competitor, feeding him proprietary information. 3 years of my life, my company's research, all a game to her. He sat down heavily on a bench, staring at his hands. I told myself I'd never be vulnerable again, that I'd see through people's masks before they could hurt me. But then you arrived, and every test I designed, you passed without even trying. Not because you were clever enough to fool me, but because you're genuinely, impossibly kind. And that terrified me more than any betrayal ever did. Sophie's expression softened slightly, but she didn't move closer. Why did it terrify you? Because, Adrian said quietly, it meant I was wrong. Wrong about people. Wrong about the world. Wrong about the walls I'd built being necessary. If someone like you existed, someone who offered their last $3,000 to a billionaire they thought was ruined, then I'd wasted years of my life hiding from connection that might actually be real. Silence stretched between them. A bird sang somewhere in the garden outside, its melody bright and oblivious to human drama. Finally, Sophie spoke. My mother says that hurt people, and that healed people heal people. I think you've been hurt for so long you forgot there was any other way to live. She came back into the room, sitting on the bench beside him, though maintaining careful distance. I'm angry at what you did. Furious, actually. But I also understand why you did it. You shouldn't forgive me this easily, Adrian said. I'm not forgiving you easily. Trust me, I'm going to be processing this for a while. Sophie picked at a loose thread on her jacket. But I'm choosing to believe that people can change. That someone who was so broken they had to test everyone can learn to trust again. That's a choice I'm making. Not because you've earned it, but because that's who I choose to be. Adrian felt something release in his chest, some tightly wound mechanism finally unwinding. I want to help your mother, he said. Not as a test, not as manipulation. Because it's the right thing to do, and because watching you sacrifice everything for her has shown me what real love looks like. Sophie's breath caught. Mr. Hartwell. Adrian, he interrupted. Please. I think we're past formalities. Adrian. She tried the name carefully. I can't accept charity. It's not charity. It's... Adrian searched for the right words. It's me trying to become the person you somehow believed I could be. You saw something in me during that storm, something I'd forgotten existed. Let me prove you weren't wrong. Tears spilled down Sophie's cheeks now. Why? Why does this matter so much to you? Adrian finally found the courage to speak the truth lodged in his heart. Because somewhere between testing your character and being stunned by your kindness, I fell in love with you. Not with an employee, not with the subject of an experiment, but with the woman who came back in a storm because she couldn't bear the thought of anyone being alone. The woman who notices how light transforms wallpaper, who offers her last savings to someone she thought needed it, who plants flowers in a house that had forgotten how to bloom. Sophie stared at him, emotions warring across her face. You can't just... That's not... I'm still angry at you. You should be, Adrian agreed. I'm angry at myself, but I'm also honest for the first time in years, maybe in my life. And if you can't forgive me yet, I understand. I'll still help your mother. No strings attached. I'll still pay you what you've earned. But I needed you to know that you changed something fundamental in me. Whether or not you choose to be part of my life, going forward, you've already transformed it. 6 months later, the conservatory had been completely renovated into a garden room, all glass walls and flowering plants. Sophie's mother, Ruth, sat in a comfortable chair, her color healthy, her eyes bright with life that experimental treatment had restored, treatment that Adrian's resources had made possible. You're spoiling me, Mr. Hartwell, Ruth said, accepting a cup of tea from him. Adrian, please, Mrs. Monroe. And it's impossible to spoil someone with your daughter's spirit. She gets it from you, I understand. Ruth laughed. She gets her stubbornness. From me, certainly. Took her 3 months to finally agree to date you officially, didn't it? Worth every day of waiting, Adrian replied, glancing through the glass where Sophie was working in what had become her meditation garden, a space she'd created in the estate's grounds for herself and anyone who needed peaceful contemplation. The mansion had transformed. What had been a cold showplace was now warm with life. Staff were treated as valued team members. Weekly dinners brought together employees, their families, and people from the community. Sophie had started a program offering job training and support for other families facing medical crises, funded by Hartwell Technologies but run with her characteristic compassion. Adrian still had his company, still made ruthless business decisions when necessary. But he came home now to laughter, to Sophie's off-key singing while she cooked, to Ruth's wise counsel, to the brother Sophie had supported through college and who now worked in Adrian's research division. He came home to love. Messy, complicated. Real love that couldn't be tested or measured, only accepted. Sophie entered the conservatory, dirt on her hands and sunlight in her hair. Adrian, Mom's tired. She should rest. Already arranging it, Adrian said, offering his arm to Ruth, who accepted with a grateful smile. After helping Ruth to her room, Adrian and Sophie stood together on the terrace, watching the sun set over grounds that now flourished with the same care Sophie brought to everything she touched. Do you still test people? Sophie asked quietly. Every day, Adrian admitted. But now I'm testing whether I can be worthy of the trust they offer. Whether I can be as brave as you were, offering kindness without guarantee of return. Sophie leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. That's not bravery. That's just being human. You taught me the difference, Adrian said, between being protected and being alive. The test had ended months ago, the test he'd designed for Sophie, and the inadvertent test she'd created for him by simply being genuine in a world of calculation. They'd both passed and failed in equal measure. But the real victory wasn't in the testing. It was in what came after, when they chose to build something together on the fragile foundation of truth. In the envelope Sophie had brought that day, Adrian had later discovered, was $3,247. Every penny she had, along with a note in her mother's shaky handwriting. Use it. Some people are worth saving. He kept that note framed in his study now, a reminder that the greatest test of character isn't how we protect ourselves from betrayal, but how we remain open to love despite having been hurt. Sophie had passed that test long before she met him. Adrian was still learning, still growing, still becoming the man reflected in her unwavering belief. And in a mansion that had finally learned to bloom, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.